You're listening to Narcotica, a podcast giving you the straight dope about drugs and the people who use them.
Hey, Narcotica listeners, this is Troy Farah, your co-host and production manager. Joining me is co-founder and producer Chris Moraff and co-host and producer Aaron Ferguson. Say hi, guys.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, Troy.
We're doing just a quick chat episode that's just between us. It's been a while since we caught up directly with listeners, and there are some updates we want to share. Our production schedule has been a little lower than we want it to be, but we are working on things, and we hope to have something more formal for you very soon. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Zachary Siegel left Narcotica a few months ago. We wanted to do an official goodbye episode to send him off because he was just so instrumental in giving this show its voice early on. Narcotica is in its 7th year next summer, which is pretty insane. It started with me and Zach talking on Twitter back when that was still a useful website. I listened to tons of podcasts then, and none of the ones about drugs were any good back then. This was in 2018, and so I got the idea to start our own and discussed it with Zach. He said he'd been talking with Chris Moraff about this project, and we brought him on board, and we even had a big-time NPR producer back then, John Aarons, as our co-producer, but he left for bigger and brighter things. And Zach has moved on too, but we sincerely wish him all the best and understand that this little project isn't always sustainable, despite our best efforts, and that's okay. We're not doing this for the money or anything like that. We're doing this because we really care about progressive drug policy and the people that it impacts. And having Aaron on board has been such an amazing experience. He really understands the voice that we're trying to share here. He's brought on numerous amazing guests that we've learned so much from. And he makes some of the incredible music on this show. So we completely plan on keeping Narcotica going for 70 years, however long, we live, however long people want to listen to us. We've also been actively seeking sponsorship. We've been ad-free for the entire 6.5 years we've been on the air. That's maybe not the best business model, but we are thinking of finding somebody that's a good sponsor, not somebody that's going to screw people over or something like that, just so that we can have the resources to bring this program to a bigger audience. But for now, it's me, Chris, and Aaron, and we still want to make some amazing journalism that challenges the drug war. We just haven't had the time or energy that we once did. We all have different responsibilities now. Chris and Aaron are parents. I have a full-time job, and I'm a caretaker as well. So I'm sure everybody understands that, but none of this would be possible without our patrons who support the show and are just freaking amazing. They help us pay for hosting and distribution and so much more. You can join them at patreon.com/narcotica if you feel inclined, but this really isn't about that. We're just trying to, shout out our supporters. Above all, everything we just said, I think the most important thing that we want people to take away from it is that this is the message we're trying to send on Narcotica. People who use drugs deserve dignity and respect. Prohibition doesn't work, and we need to think smarter about this. All right, so for this episode, we kind of just wanted to look at 2024 in retrospect, and this has been a crazy fucking year. It's felt like 4 years in one, and a lot of stuff has changed in drug policy. So we kind of wanted to just discuss amongst ourselves some of the biggest news that we saw this year and where we think 2025 will bring us. And also, the big thing that's looming over everyone's heads right now is the incoming Trump administration and how they will, act on drug policy. I'll let Aaron or Chris take the floor, but I think, just to kind of start it off, the big thing that the biggest thing that I think was on headlines this year is that overdose deaths are decreasing, or at least decreased a little bit. But I think that there's a lot of nuance to that that we can discuss here.
Yeah, I'll start with that, Troy. Actually, there was new provisional data, I think, that came out even today or very recently that showed even further declines. And in Pennsylvania, in particular, the decline's it's like 26% or something. These are fatalities, I should say. And I sort of took a hiatus from journalism for the past year and launched a drug checking program. We do qualitative analysis using mass spec at one of the best labs in the country here in outside Philadelphia. So I have some insight into kind of what's going on. There's simply less pure fentanyl, and bags have less fentanyl in them. And there's been a sedative, like I guess, for lack of a better word, a sedative wave of this overdose crisis that's really taken over. With like so we had xylazine, medetomidine, and I'd say it was about 2 years ago. I was talking with somebody at Prevention Point here, who's our certain service provider, and we predicted that there would be a decline because of all the xylazine. He was doing less reversals that required Narcan. There's people that are hardly ever using Narcan anymore. Overdose reversals have shifted from responsiveness to breathing. So the sternum rub is no longer really an effective tool or to use to determine whether somebody is okay or not. These sedatives are so strong, and at the same time, like all hell is broken loose in Sinaloa, and the fentanyl supply has been strained, and we're seeing bags here in Philadelphia that have less than 1% fentanyl in it. So I'd say that before we patted the backs of drug warriors who say that the interdiction is what's done this job, is really supply side. It's a supply side clusterfuck combined with the introduction of new additives and particularly sedatives to the supply. And I know, Aaron, you're engaged in drug checking as well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I mean, and I would agree with all that. But it's like with complex phenomena like this, where you have something with so many different factors that affect it, and there are market factors, there are global relations factors, there are political factors. And because you're talking about a lot of fucking people, like we're losing a stadium full of people every year. And yeah, I've been doing like mail order drug checking down here with the drug user union. I got started Texas Drug User Health Union, just because it just doesn't make sense to do in-person drug checking in Texas. It's so spread out, and we can't get funding for shit. So it's just been easier to do the mail order stuff. But to me, what's become more salient than anything else through this whole process is just that the information about solving these problems has to fucking come from people who use drugs, because you can't scratch your head at something this complex from the outside. And I've seen a lot of folks do that. And I mean, I've seen smart people do it. And just say, well, yeah, it's this thing or it's that thing. And it's like, unless we're getting this information directly from drug users, it's all just guesswork. And stuff like drug checking is a public health intervention that's being run by people who use drugs, right? And it's our best guess, it's our best chance at figuring out like whether overdoses go up or down, what's actually going on with the supply, because the only alternative to that is for someone to go to jail or die.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting, because it makes me wonder if we're in a fifth wave of the drug crisis. I just want to kind of contextualize that and say, I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the framework of waves in the drug crisis. That's a framework that's been promoted mostly by Dan Sicarios. And it's interesting. He's said that we are in the fourth wave. First it was opioids, prescription opioids, then it was heroin, then it was fentanyl, and now it's like stimulants. But if we're kind of shifting away to more of these sedatives like xylazine and medetomidine, that's very interesting. I wonder if that's a signal of a bigger shift that we're going into.
And things move so quickly that Dan, I worked with Dan on a paper on tranq wounds here in Philly that's just about to be published, and we're already seeing, like, I'm hearing from ER docs that they're not even seeing them as much anymore. Like it's gone down. Like that's how much the supplies it's been shifting. It's I would say, and I've asked people this, and they've agreed with me that this is the biggest disruption of the street opioid supply since the introduction of fentanyl, at least on the East Coast. Yeah.
Like it makes me wonder, like, if this is impacted by the number of supply routes that a given area has, because like there's not a lot of supply routes in a lot of the southern states. It's like the drugs either come from a port, which if they come from a port, they're probably coming from somewhere down way south. If they come by land, it's probably Mexico, possibly one of the countries further south. But for like the eastern, western coast, you have a ton of supply routes because so much of it is coming by sea. There's less of it coming by land because it's not coming across the border. It just makes me wonder if, like, because we don't have the same variety of substances down in Texas, right?
Right. You still have black tar, right? I mean, that's yeah.
Right. It makes me wonder, if this has to do with like the variety of supply routes.
Yeah, well, we're Sinaloa territory out here, so like the Sinaloa cartel pretty much like has a lock on Pennsylvania and the area regions around it. And I'm sure that El Chapo's son, like abducted El Mayo, the co-founder of this cartel, and flew him in the United States and basically handed him over to the government here. And there's just the violence in Sinaloa has been like crazy, like dead bodies in the street every day. They're at war, so I'm sure that's had something to do with it. There was also the Sinaloa cartel prior to that had put out like an edict that they were going to, that it was verboten to produce fentanyl anymore. And then what they did was just consolidate it to the upper echelons, but people were getting killed for making fentanyl. And that was just because it was just bad PR. The cartels are getting into other businesses, sometimes like taking over legitimate businesses and making them theirs, that kind of stuff. It's still a money-making cash, crop, and we still have record seizures, it seems, at the border. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it could be that I think these trafficking routes are just getting more. And there's people that are more expert to talk about this, but I think that when you have such a violent atmosphere, certainly in one of the biggest fentanyl producing states, you're going to see a disruption of some kind.
Yeah, the way that xylazine is changing right now is so interesting to me because, we are some of the people that first noticed this stuff, I think, in media. I remember, Chris, you did that episode with Alex Krotulski in 2021 about street synthetics and xylazine becoming more of a thing. And as it became more on the scene, it was sort of like this horror story. People were calling it a zombie drug, and the wounds that people were reporting from it are just incredibly grisly. But it also was like people didn't really want xylazine, it seemed like. People weren't seeking it out. They didn't ask for this to be put in their bag. But now it seems like people do seek it out a little bit more, and it also might even have a protective factor. First of all, part of the reason why people want xylazine is it gives fentanyl legs. Like, one of the problems with fentanyl is it wears off very quickly. And so you're having to use it more often during the day, whereas other opioids, especially heroin, like you can do it, less in the day, and you can kind of maintain a more stable and less chaotic drug use. But xylazine can kind of like give fentanyl that edge that people want. And so when we're looking at the drug overdoses are decreasing, and it didn't decrease that much. It 10,000 less, from 110,000 a year in 2022 to about 100,000 in 2023. And like, there's like all these victory laps being done by the Biden administration and being like, oh my God, this is such a big change. But it's like, that's 10,000 less people that died, but there was still 100,000 that died. It's like,
and it doesn't get tracked.
Yeah, so I'm wondering how
people that are either brain dead or like not, they're certainly tracking of non-fatal overdoses, but it's a lot harder to do because they're often reversed in the street. They're often not reported. And then, there's the people that never come out of a coma that we often don't hear about, so there's other forms of overdoses, but the fatalities seems to be the number that people are interested in, and that's always been my reason for calling this an overdose crisis. Is like, I don't care if you use opioids, but you shouldn't die from them, and or suffer any injuries, and I think that this is just like reflective of the failure of drug policy over the past. I mean, we swung the pendulum back to anti-harm reduction here in Philadelphia. We went from being the first city to announce we would open a SIF to our new mayor will not put a dime of city money into syringe exchange.
Yeah, and like the part of the story that just goes untold every time we discover a new substance like this is the pile of bodies that had to put themselves on the gears and be lost before we even discovered these things existed. I had close friends in the drug user activism community that almost died before anyone knew what xylazine was. And no one was listening. And it wasn't until a mass spectrometer became available and we could check and find out that it was there. And by then it was almost too late. And that's part of this that gets lost in like our fascination with the latest drug panic.
Yeah, I mean that's the truth, and like I was going to shift gears here to media and the way the media like reports things. I mean, we're very highly respected. I get a lot of people that I meet along the road and where I speak that know about Narcotica, and they're doctors. They're lawyers. They're people that say to me almost universally, I learn a lot from your show. Unfortunately, the rest of the media doesn't report that way, and I guess I one of the reasons I sort of shifted gears into this drug checking is I got a little jaded being part of the media. I broke the xylazine story in 2018 is when I wrote about it, and it wasn't until last year that I got a call from the New York Times, and they said, well, congratulations, you beat us by like 3 years or something. And I feel like I've been telling the same story over and over again. How many times detoxes in jail? We're suffering from like all these detoxes in jail here in Philadelphia now. Deaths by detox, like deaths in jail from detox. I mean, that's a story that we've all written. I'm sure I wrote it twice. I know Zach's written it. I mean, nobody's listening, and I don't expect that's going to change with the new administration, but it gets deflating.
Understatement of the year is that the next administration is going to have some serious challenges with drug policy. Like you were saying, Chris, like there's been this war even before Trump gets into office again. Like there has been a war on syringe access, even in progressive places like California and Colorado. I've been hearing stories of syringe access programs getting shut down and this whole backlash. In Canada, they're shutting down so many overdose prevention sites, and it's just like we've made all these incremental wins, and then everything's been kind of eroded. And Oregon obviously is like a huge setback, I would say, because they decriminalized all drugs in 2020 and didn't really do anything to support the law, and it was kind of badly written. No offense to the people that wrote it, but like it wasn't a perfect law. It was experimental, and then people in Oregon saw the experiment as failing, and they voted to repeal it. And it's just right back to more prisons and more arrests and more of the same crap that doesn't work. And it's just like the amount of progress that we've made nationally as a harm reduction movement, like it feels like it's slipping away very quickly, even for very basic things like syringe access is like such a proven medical intervention. Like it just makes sense to do it. Like even if you don't care about people who use drugs, and I think you should care, but a lot of people just don't give a shit. Even those types of people will like support syringe access because it will lower HIV, it'll lower hepatitis C outbreaks. And Mike Pence came around on this issue. Like that's how common sense it is, and even that is being eroded.
You mentioned Mike Pence. A funny aside is, when that whole thing went down on January 6th, and he wouldn't go vote with Trump, he apparently consulted with Dan Quayle on the phone before he made his decision and asked if it was constitutional. So me and my wife joke all the time that who would have ever thought we'd say Dan Quayle saved America. But anyway, then America. I don't even know what to say about the last election. I mean, who would have ever thought that we would bring that guy back in again?
And who knows what's going to happen, right? It's like anybody, you might as well blindfold yourself and spin around in circles. And what happened in Oregon is so baffling because there was so much public support for it. That's what blew my mind more than anything else, was just how much public support there was for the repeal.
Yeah, but they didn't teach the cops how to work with the law. Like, they didn't really educate people on it. There was like, the cops were like supposed to give a ticket to people and give them a business card that had phone numbers for treatment on it. The phone numbers didn't work, things like that. Like, it was just not, you can't just make policy. You have to actually feed it. And like, they didn't feed it. And so it just collapsed on itself. And it didn't address any of the underlying issues that were causing people to become unhoused or spiral out into addiction, which is, inequality, lack of access to healthcare. That's a big topic right now because of the whole insurance CEO assassination. It's just like so frustrating that law has been repealed because it wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction, and people recognize that. But like the minority that were freaking out about not seeing a solution to the homeless encampments, like they just didn't want to see that anymore. It's like they don't want to sweep it under the rug, and the Supreme Court has made it legal to round up people without their consent and just put them in jails or forced treatment. And California is really embracing that policy. You can thank Gavin Newsom for that. He just wants to fill up those prisons that were kind of empty because of cannabis being legalized.
Yeah. And this is history repeating itself as well. A lot of the same shit happened back during the repeal of slavery, right? And a lot of folks would say it hasn't been repealed, but every major advancement toward human well-being that would happen, you had all this backlash. Oh, see what's happening now that now that we are getting rid of segregation. See what's happening now that we're allowing this. See what's happening now that we're allowing that. And then it gets rolled back, and everyone says, "Oh, we tried that and it didn't work." Right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's the confirmation bias, and it's all happening again with the drug war.
Yeah, we're saying the same thing here. The decision, the choice between jail or involuntary treatment, which is, I wrote about that as well, and why it would never work. And well, nobody's listened. But I mean, you can't legally keep somebody for longer than they are alleged, mentally ill, so to speak. If you involuntarily commit somebody, and as soon as somebody's feeling better, they're going to go before a judge, and there's going to be no grounds to keep them anymore, and they're going to have no tolerance, and they're going to go out and overdose.
Yeah, I don't know what to worry about more with the coming several years, because a lot of times drug policy doesn't really get airtime in politics unless it's politically expedient to do so. It's never about actually solving the problem. It's more about, okay, what can I get out of this, and using this as an issue to either control the border or do some other thing or win an election. But it has to be politically expedient. And I don't know whether to hope that it gets ignored or that it gets focused on, because it being ignored could prevent a lot of really disastrous policies, like really punitive approaches, as have been the bailiwick of the right in the past, from being enacted. Whereas it being just kind of ignored while we are distracted by the cascade of lies and other disasters that come our way, it doesn't get solved that way either, but does any more damage get done?
I would say let it be ignored, because people like us, the community groups are doing work way ahead of what even some even hospitals and treatment centers and any government officials are doing. Let us take care of our own, I guess. It is worth mentioning that doctors are becoming a bit more progressive with withdrawal management out here. I don't know if it's the same way where you're at. the average. It varies by hospital, but we're seeing baseline of methadone, Dilaudid as needed, ketamine for tranq withdrawal, or sometimes a benzo, and then maybe some comfort meds on top of that. But that's like unheard of in the past. So doctors are learning from this crisis that we've seen here with the xylazine and the xylazine withdrawal syndrome, and medetomidine withdrawal syndrome is even worse, is what I'm told. And they're responding to it because people weren't going to the hospital. I mean, people just would not go. They'd have wounds, they're just down to the bone, and not go to the hospital. Something had to change.
Trump announced a national emergency for the overdose crisis in 2017, and basically nothing happened. Like, there wasn't a huge change in the trajectory of overdose deaths or any of that. Like, so kind of was that what we were just describing, like less focus on the policy itself, and people were allowed to just be able to do the work on their own. But I do think that the incoming administration is going to focus on this issue more than they did last time, because it is politically expedient for what they really want, which is war with Mexico. I really hope I'm wrong about this, but I just see so many leaders on the MAGA movement being like they're lusting at this, like salivating is the word I was trying to find. They're salivating at this idea of war with Mexico. They want to bomb the cartels, probably with drone strikes to start, and then it will just escalate from there, which is totally illegal, of course, but that doesn't really matter. Like, they're going to do the same thing that has happened in the Middle East, like, just bombing the shit out of things, civilian casualties, all this kind of stuff, because they want to say this is going to stop immigration and this is going to stop the flow of fentanyl. I don't think that Trump gives a shit about fentanyl. I don't think Trump gives a shit about overdoses at all. But I do think it's like, hey, we can use this as an excuse, this flood of drugs coming into the country. We can use this as an excuse to go to war with Mexico.
It seems like a good time to point out once again that in 1991, or was it 1993, he said we should legalize all drugs, and we're just giving money to the cartels, and we're basically idiots for not doing so. So let's just get that back out there in the media and the public domain, public attention. Google it.
Yeah, and that's probably the most frustrating thing about all of this is that the overdose crisis can't be treated as a problem of its own to be solved. That it has to be underneath some other bigger issue that's more important, or has to be part of some broader strategy. But it's true what you say, Chris. The people locally and the people on the ground are doing the work, are going to continue doing the work, have been doing it under previous conditions that were harrowing. And we've survived this shit long enough to fight back. I really don't think all of this narcissism can stop us because our lives depend on it. And people who use drugs are going to keep doing this shit. The drug checking itself has to come from the drug using community. It can't come from the outside because you have to have fucking drugs to do it. Right. And so there's so many of these things that I think do have aspects that can be resilient to the selfish pursuits of politics, but not that they're not affected by it, but the things that are hidden, it seems, are sometimes the most helpful. So yeah, I agree. Maybe we should just hope that it doesn't get acknowledged and that other things distract the political process.
Yeah, and Troy, you brought up a great point about this fervor for Mexico, and that's that. If there's anything that Trump has really dug his teeth into, is obviously been the Southwest border and immigration more than anything else. I don't think he really gives a shit about fentanyl and overdoses any more than he gives a shit about abortions. Like, that's just political expediency. But I think he would use any pretext to go into Mexico and stir shit up there, definitely.
It's what autocracies tend to do, right? They destabilize neighboring smaller countries. And right, it's the hallmark, really, of an autocracy is to do this sort of thing. And when Russia started meddling around in Ukraine, it was basically just saying to the world, like, we can do this. And I genuinely think that Putin thought that he could just waltz right into Ukraine and do whatever he wanted, that the rest of the world wouldn't really intervene. But it sets a precedent because that sort of thing has not happened for a very long time. And I really don't find a lot of disanalogy between that and what the United States is doing with Mexico.
I believe I heard somewhere, and I'm looking it up right now, that I think in Russia methadone is banned, and a lot of Ukrainian drug users. There was a story. Somebody reached out to me from the Ukrainian drug using community at some point with some information on this, and it's just it seems like drugs have an angle in everything. I mean, the Taliban is now back in power in Afghanistan, and there's more like amphetamine coming out of there now. The Golden Triangle is producing a ton of methamphetamine, or Caprigon, I guess. Mexico is now producing white heroin, which they never could do before. It's like, and they all sort of tie together. And cocaine, we haven't even talked about cocaine. Like the record amounts of cocaine are making it to Europe. These Balkan crime groups are taking over countries like that used to be peaceful, like Honduras. And I was speaking with a journalist from Costa Rica that didn't even know how to report on fentanyl. They never even saw fentanyl. There was never a fentanyl overdose in the country, and they were starting to get it down there. And a lot of that has to do with the cartels shifting a lot of the cocaine transports into the Central American countries for transportation across the ocean into Spain, mostly, parts of Africa, and they're catching like fishing boats with tons of cocaine on them. It's fueled a lot of violence in the Netherlands and Belgium. So we've definitely exported our drug war, and our policies have reverberated around the world in negative ways.
I think it's good to bring up Ukraine. I'm sure you heard that information you just mentioned was probably from Jennifer Carroll, right? Like, she's been doing a lot of work on drug use in Ukraine, and I've always, like, people getting methadone there, like, that's in a literal war zone. Like, I think that's a little bit more difficult than what we'll be dealing with under the Trump administration. But the thing is, like, exactly what Aaron was saying is that drug users are resilient and intelligent and creative people, and we will survive. It's just not everyone. That's the real tragedy, is that a lot of people will die from these policies that are designed to not help people but punish them.
Yeah. And while we're doom scrolling, I'll reel it back a little bit and say that when you mentioned methadone, in the middle of all the nonsense that's been going down, there have actually been the most positive changes to the way that methadone is regulated in its history over the last year. And I believe that the bulk of this is a result of activism on the part of patients and people who use drugs, because I was part of that. And I've been part of a lot of the, not only folks who have just put their lives on the line, and we've lost so many of our elders in the drug user activism community during this period and during COVID, but so many of us who've just made a lot of sacrifices to fight for methadone. And I'm the methadone liaison for the National Drug User Union. And so I've been around since day one during COVID, when we started acting up for methadone and really just shouting and forcing folks to listen to us. We'd created a space where no one was being heard. And fast forward to today, you have people who have been working in methadone their entire lives and prescribing it for their entire careers that have not seen really any change. And there have been more changes in the last 12 months to the regulations governing it than in anyone's careers or lifetimes. And we're in our 4th generation of methadone patients now, possibly 5th. And so that to us was seen as a major win, even though there's so much more work that needs to be done. It needs to be broken outside of this black box that no one can access. But at the same time, people are actually seeking treatment now. Like, all of the treatment centers are swelling majorly. And I believe it's the result of the fact that they're not making people come in every day. They're starting people off on higher doses. They're doing telehealth. They're talking about mobile methadone. And they're doing some of these more things that just make fucking sense. There's no reason why they ever didn't do them.
Yeah, and in a large, really, like, if you look in the larger picture, we've really seen more progress in like the messaging around drugs and drug use over the past 20 years than we've seen regression. I mean, when I was going in and out of rehab, methadone, MAT wasn't even mentioned. Like, I mean, nobody mentioned it. It was like verboten kind of, I find it to be malpractice if you're going in and out of a facility and they don't tell you, hey, there's this other option for you. So MAT has become more accepted, than it ever was, even among people who use drugs. Self shamed methadone users as trading one drug for another. Buprenorphine, we've had that come out. It has different value for different people, but there has been more of a push to see this as and see drug substance use disorders, even outside of opioids, as an issue that can be solved with, or at least maintained with medication. And when I was using in the 90s, the cops would just take you under the tracks and beat you up. You know what I mean? Like, there was no compassion for when I in the 90s for any heroin user, and I think even people on the right have come around on that, which is worth mentioning, that progress is happening and has happened.
Yeah, I think that's really good to point out. And I think even these regressions that we're seeing, or maybe the potential for more regression in the next administration, it won't last. Like, it's just prohibition is a failed idea. We've known this for over a century. It just doesn't work. It's not even constitutional, in my opinion. Like, you have bodily autonomy, or you should, at least in theory. And so I think in the long term, yes, we will get to a place where people who use drugs can feel safe and happy and healthy. It's going to take a lot of fighting still.
Have we had Sam Rivera on yet? Because we really need to have Sam Rivera on to talk about.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll try to orchestrate that, because Sam runs the two overdose prevention sites in America, in New York, and he is just an amazing person.
But that's another thing maybe we should touch on, right? Which is the whole debate around OPCs. I mean, you guys probably know more about it than I do, but
I mean, I'll just give a quick. I mean, I made a whole documentary with Seth Dalton that was. I mean, steps where Philly was supposed to be the city, and over the course of that time, we documented the anatomy of a failure, and we did get up to New York and touch on and spent time, and we're given access to everywhere. The rooms where drugs are injected or smoked. But I could say that it was a very disheartening experience here, and to see the just vitriol from people that call themselves progressive. Even the street that I live on is a gentrified street, a block over from some projects, and I work with people who use drugs, so I know people who use drugs, and I had some neighbors call the city on me and say I was a nuisance property because I was having a guy that was obviously homeless and probably addicted by most people's standards of viewing it, that take my trash out for me. This is the kind of mentality that's NIMBYism, that and that's what happened with that's what really shocked me with the SIFs in here in Philly is once that vitriol happened, it was staunch Philly Democrats, African American Democrats, cheering on MAGA crowds against SIF and overdose prevention sites, as they call them now. And it was extremely disheartening to see how much stigma there is still about particularly certain types of drug use. I think methamphetamine and fentanyl are probably the most stigmatized, I would say. But it was a very disheartening time to see this stigma just rear its ugly head, and to see the reaction of people in progressive neighborhoods that have Democrat signs during the voting time and you compost and do all this other stuff. But, a homeless guy steps on the block or sits down on the stoop and they're calling the police.
Yeah, unfortunately, there is still a lot of education that has to be done. And I guess that's where we come in. We're doing our best to just kind of get the truth out about how things should work.
Yeah, I feel lucky to have this platform. And I really want to, in the coming year, bring everyone that listens to this show, the voices of people who are doing this work in a thankless manner. There's just so many people doing harm reduction, doing drug user activism, and on the daily, sacrificing life, sacrificing time, sacrificing energy, often with no thank you in return. And if the least we can do is bring those voices to our listeners here, I'd be very happy for the coming year. And I want to do our best to do that if we can. Yeah,
we will keep doing this as long as we can, unless the Trump administration makes podcasts illegal. Which maybe would be a blessing in some ways, but not for us.
And I would encourage our listeners that may be starving for content to go back and start from the beginning again. We've got a lot of great episodes. We lost David Stewart, who was one of our great interviews that we did on chemsex. So we lost some people along the way. But I go back now and again and pull stuff up, and it's like hearing it the first time again.
Well, it's been an opportunity too. Like I feel like it's a joy and a blessing, really, like to just be able to talk to some of these people and learn from them. And I thank you both for not to compliment ourselves too much, but it's been great working with both of you. And
Troy, we owe you a debt of gratitude for keeping this thing above board. I mean, if it wasn't for you, I don't think we would have survived for a time there.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And to me, so many of the wins that I've seen for people who use drugs have just come from sheer stubbornness. In fact, most of them, the ones that I could really point to and say that they will prevail and persist, are just the ones that are the result of tenacity and a refusal to quit. When we keep showing up and we keep being in your face as people that use drugs, we keep advocating for and speaking sense, having the courage to be boring, whatever it is, right? To me, that's the thing that gets the gains in the long run, and I'm honored to be part of this. We're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep doing this no matter what. If we miss a month or two of episodes, hey, so be it. It's like Chris said, I mean, there's a trove of content back there that you might not have heard. And so many of these topics are evergreen. We're going to keep plugging and bringing it to you. And we want you to be part of the conversation, everyone listening.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks to all our listeners for staying with us all these years. I can't believe what a long journey it's been, and I'm grateful to have been a part of it and continue to be a part of it.
Thanks for listening to Narcotica, an independent production by Narco Media. Co-hosted and co-produced by Troy Farah, Christopher Moraff, and me, Aaron Ferguson. If you like the show, you can find out more at narcocast.com and support us by joining our Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/narcotica. Patrons get free stickers, which are personally mailed to them and can request a shout out on the show. And now patrons can even get 30% off of merch in our new store, which is at narcocast.myshopify.com. We have t-shirts and coffee mugs, one that says there are drugs in here, which is awesome. More stuff will be added soon. As always, we're so grateful to the folks that make this show possible. I mean, really, a little goes a long way, so thanks for making Narcotica keep going. We're ad-free. We want to keep it that way if we can. If Patreon isn't for you, that's fine. You can help us out just by spreading the word. Tell all your friends about the podcast, advocate for social justice, and abolish the drug war. You can also rate us wherever you get your podcasts, and that helps the show get a boost. Our theme music is by Glass Boy, and Jenny Shea is the voice of Narcotica. Additional music's by myself, Nomad1. And you can follow us on Spotify, iTunes, Twitter, YouTube, Baseball, Instagram, SoundCloud, YouTube, all good outlets. those are the best ways to try to contact us as well if you have a suggestion, complaint, or if you just want to tell us nice things. That's everything, folks. Hope you have a great week and stay safe out there in the drug world.